Okay, hi everyone. Again, thank you for coming to the webinar today with the National Research Collaborative for Foster Alumni in Higher Ed webinar series. My name is Amy Salazar. I'm on the executive leadership team for the NRC FAHE. I have the slide up here with the website for the NRC FAHE. If you aren't currently getting our emails and you want to join the email list, please go to www.nrc-fahe.org and you can scroll down on that very first page and there's a place where you can join or subscribe. So before we get started with today's webinar, I just wanted to give you a little bit of information about our April webinar. So our April webinar will be held Wednesday, April 15th from 1 to 2 p.m. Pacific time, which is 4 to 5 Eastern time. And the presenters will be Megan Peel, who's an assistant professor of social work, and Erica Buford, sorry if I'm saying that wrong and you're on the call, who are both at University of Texas at San Antonio. And their presentation is called Creating a Pipeline of Educational Support for Foster Youth and Alumni, the Bexar County Pilot Project. And this Texas State Legislature recently funded a multi-tiered approach to improving educational outcomes for foster youth and alumni in Bexar County, Texas. And the pilot project includes both 2- and 4-year post-secondary institutions to support foster alumni currently on campuses, as well as critical partnerships with the Children's Court, Court-appointed Special Advocate, CASA organization, K-12 independent school districts, and the State Child Welfare Agency to develop a college-bound docket and enhance educational advocacy for youth in care. And their webinar will highlight the early successes of that pilot program, as well as important practice and policy implications for multi-systemic collaborations and creating a broader scope of educational support for foster youth and alumni. So if you don't, again, if you get our emails, then you should have the link to register for that webinar. Oh, and it is Erica Buford. Sorry about that. And thank you, Erica, for correcting me. So if you want to register for that webinar and you don't have the emails, feel free to also email me. You can look me up on the WSU website or Washington State University website, or my email is amy.salazar@wsu.edu. So our webinar today, oh, and I wanted to just briefly pause and say, I imagine a lot of us are working from home today. I am, and I know our presenter is. So I want to go ahead and ask you to please excuse any noises from pets or children that we might have unexpectedly pop up during today's webinar, and hopefully everyone is understanding about that given the current circumstances. So our presenter for today will be Bridget Colacchio Wesley, and her presentation will be called Star Academy, Reflections on an Innovative Program for Foster Youth on a College Campus. And Bridget is a licensed clinical social worker with teaching, research, and practice experience in child welfare. And she's currently at Loyola University Chicago, teaching and working in faculty professional development while completing her doctorate in social work. And I forgot to say that if questions come up for people during the webinar, if you can go ahead and type them into the chat box. You don't have to wait until the end. I will wait and read the questions out at the end, but if questions come up for you, you can go ahead and type them into the chat box and I will read those out to our presenter at the end of her presentation. So we'll have, so Bridget will present for about 40 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up for that Q&A time. Okay, so with that, I will hand it over to you, Bridget.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. I am going to work to get my screen shared with you. And is that working, Amy?
Yes, it is. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Okay. No worries. Fabulous. So I'm really glad to be with you. I appreciate the invitation, and I'm excited to speak with you today about our Star Academy, which is a program that we've been hosting on our Loyola University campus for the past several years. I hope that there's implications for you all, whether you work with foster youth sort of outside of the college setting or in college, and really at multiple ages as well. Briefly, what I'm planning to do today is give some introductions to myself, to our youth, and to the program itself, talk to you about some of my observations as a clinician, but also as the program director for a number of years as it relates to youth challenges and strengths that we observed over the course of the youth's participation in our program. I also want to share with you a research project that we're just writing up the paper on that is derived from interviews that were conducted with the youth in our program. And then I've got some suggestions for anybody working with young people in care before college, in college, or just in that college age range. And then some ideas for future research for those of us who are working in that area as well. So as Amy mentioned, my name is Bridget Colacchio Wesley, and I'm at Loyola University. I currently am finishing my doctorate in social work with a focus on child welfare, and particularly the experience of young people in care. I'm really lucky to be able to do research. I teach bachelor's level and master's level students who are getting their degrees in social work, and I get to work with these wonderful young people in our program as well. And my previous work experience was with foster families, doing individual and family therapy with families involved in the child welfare system as well. So I'm excited to be able to talk to you about this program, and I always need to begin by a little disclosure that I really love these people that I'm talking about. These young people in our program and their families are important to me. I care about them personally and professionally. And I know that that in some ways is a bias. I think it's helpful, but I know that that impacts the kind of work that I do and how I do it, both in the classroom and in my research. And so I feel like it's important that I say that out loud whenever I'm talking about our program. So the young people in our program are really just a subset of youth that we work with, either those who are in foster care and in the child welfare system, but then those young people who are college age and in college just in general. And we know that there are lots of things that are happening. There are lots of trends among college age students and young adults today that are different maybe from previous generations, and that are reasons for us to be a little bit concerned perhaps, and to think about the types of services and programs and support that we're offering to all young people at this age. We know that there are a lot of first generation students who are entering college, so they might not have the support from folks in their family who kind of know what's going on and know what it's like to transition into and succeed and proceed through college. Lots of students are accessing college who are low income, which is great news that they have access. However, the barriers that they have by virtue of being in a low income status are really difficult and add extra burdens on top of what is already a difficult challenge in being in and succeeding in college. We're seeing on college campuses far more mental health concerns, students who are coming to us with more severe diagnoses, with taking medication for mental health issues that they're confronting, and managing a lot of trauma and loss and experiences that they carry with them, as we know, as they enter our college campuses. There are more and more students who are actually homeless, either living in cars or living in shelters with family members or by themselves, or doing what we know is also a type of homelessness, which is couch surfing or moving from place to place, family members or friends, where they don't have a secure and stable place to live, even if they happen to have a place to lay their head and a roof over their head day to day. It's not stable and it's not secure, which is a type of homelessness as well. And then additionally, there's just always family responsibilities and pressures. We know our students, whether they're in care or not, they come to college or they enter their adulthood and they're still very much connected to where they came from, to their families, and they have expectations placed on them, and they have responsibilities and pressures in terms of how they're going to still be meeting the needs of their family members sometimes, even as they're taking on what they're doing in college or in work. So this is a pretty demonstration, trying to pull all of those things together and how these different realities overlap for young people. But really at the nexus of this, at this star in the middle, is what our youth in care are experiencing when they're in college. All of those challenges and trends that are typical for all college students at this time in our country's history right now is they are all applicable to our youth in care, whether or not they're in college, but certainly when they're in college. And so the overlap of constraints and demands and challenges and pressures on youth in care who are in college, it's a lot when you consider how many of these things overlap and will affect them as they are entering the college space or entering adulthood in other ways. So I'll sidestep for a moment with that being our general context and background for understanding sort of what it's like for youth in care or just young people who are college age in general. It is within that context that we have this program called First Star, and it's actually a national consortium of programs at college campuses around the country, and actually now there's a couple of sites in the United Kingdom as well. And these are all universities that have decided to take on the joy and responsibilities of running one of these programs on their college campus. And that's a really key component of the program itself, is the fact that it takes place on a college campus and is giving exposure to youth in care, what a college campus looks and feels like, and beginning to place themselves there where they might be able to imagine that this is something that they could achieve as well, even starting at the age of 14 when they join us in the program. So the First Star program, what it looks like and what we try and provide, the objectives of the program are really to create a long-term supportive community. The idea here is that young people would enter the program entering their 9th grade year of high school with the expectation that they would participate together in a cohort throughout the course of all of their high school years until they complete high school and launch hopefully to college or to work or to the military, but generally into their young adulthood. So creating a supportive community is a really important component of that, knowing that this is a group that's going to be together for at least 4 years, but as we're finding, even longer than that. The other objective is really to create some opportunities and provide services and programming aimed at the youth developing in terms of their academic and their life skills. So we know that in order for college to be a realistic possibility for any young person, that they need to have the academic skills to be able to successfully complete high school, successfully complete that college application process, and then be able to begin college and be able to stick with it, which takes a whole lot of skills that are not necessarily assessed in the classroom, but a lot of grit and perseverance and ability to seek and ask for help and accept assistance when it's offered, and lots of things that happen outside of the classroom that we lump in with these academic success skills. In terms of life skills, we're talking about young people needing to know how to cook for themselves, getting their driver's licenses so they can be independent in terms of transporting themselves around their community. We want them to know something about finances and budgeting and how to take care of their money. We need them to have some understanding of their own health and their bodies and how to be healthy and well and take care of themselves if they don't have adults who are looking after them in that way anymore. So the life skills component is really important as well, and critical as we imagine youth in care sort of launching into their adulthood, oftentimes without the assistance of supportive adults going into that phase of their lives. So ultimately, we're aiming for the students to graduate from high school and then enter post-secondary education and otherwise launch into adulthood. As we found with our group, secondary education was not an appropriate goal for some of the kids in our program, but certainly they're headed into adulthood whether we're ready or not. So that was a really important objective. So the way that we accomplish that through the program, as I mentioned, is this 4-year commitment to a cohort of youth, starting with them as early as we could, which is entering into their 9th grade year, the summer before their 9th grade year, and supporting them through their high school graduation. What the programming looks like is an intensive summer residential program for about a month where the youth would come to campus and live residentially on the campus while taking academic classes, and then lots of community building and life skills classes and sessions as well to round out a really full and robust schedule for them day to day while they were living on campus. But the idea was to get them onto the campus and into some college classrooms, working on academics, but then also working on some of their adulting skills so that they could begin to visualize themselves as future college students and help to put on the map college and vocational school and additional education after high school, and even for some of them putting high school graduation on the map as realistic goals that we were going to help them attain. For some, even the idea of graduating high school felt like a really big reach when we first met them. So that's what the summer looks like. And then throughout the course of the rest of the year, we would bring them back to campus one Saturday a month with very similar programming, some academics, but lots of community building and life skills. And the idea there was to maintain contact with the youth, help to still advance their skills in these different areas, and continue to build the community of support that they had within the program. And then this phrase, this ongoing supplemental case support, we were not caseworkers, excuse me, they have caseworkers. And so what we were doing is providing additional support. Sometimes a caseworker or a caregiver was not available to go to a teacher conference, and so we would show up for that. Or the court appearance for the family was happening and nobody else was able to accompany the child, and so we would go with them. There were lots of connecting of dots that we would try and do between the school and a therapist and the caregiver and a caseworker when maybe things were busy for one group or another and things were starting to fall through the cracks, and we would try and step in with the young person and help to troubleshoot a little bit. So between all of this, our support for the young people was ongoing, weekly at least, if not more often. But then these really significant and intensive times were once a month and then over the summer. And, oh, here's my children. Yes, okay. Okay, now they know I'm on the call. So this is what the program looked like and continued on for 4 years for our young people. This is actually some information about the program at large. This is from the network of all First Star Academies across the country. And you can see that there are some pretty good results that the network is seeing, comparing high school graduation and entering post-secondary education for non-foster youth, for foster youth, and then the last group is our First Star graduates. So we're proud of this, and also take with a grain of salt that the individual stories and lives of the young people are really important to understand, more so even than just what a graph can convey. And so that's what I'm going to try and help expose you to a little bit as we go on here. So over the course of it was really 5 years that this first cohort of young people participated in our program. There was lots of hours and lots of time spent and lots of really important and wonderful interactions and relationships. And over time, I made many observations with my clinical social work hat on, not just as the director of the program, but really thinking about the clinical and mental health and other needs that the young people were demonstrating over the course of the program. So you can see that there's a couple different areas, and I'll just talk you through these a little bit. One of the things that we noticed right off the bat and really continued throughout the course of the young people's participation in our program was how their trauma was being enacted in the group. There was quite a bit of interpersonal conflict, particularly at the beginning of the program as the young people were getting to know one another and getting to know us as the staff, that conflict was quite high actually, and not surprisingly as a result of and then causing pretty significant distress and emotional dysregulation among the kids. And this was something that we had certainly prepared for and had ways of managing, but even all of our best efforts couldn't change the reality that what the youth had experienced before we ever knew them was significant and had affected them deeply, as we know is likely with kids who've gone through the child welfare system in general. The other thing we saw was a lot of risk-taking as it related to drugs and sexual relationships and gang involvement. And in talking to the youth in the program and learning a bit more about what their lives are like, that the idea of turning to drugs or romantic relationships and gang life and those connections, that, that they were really seeking acceptance, they were seeking relief from their pain, and trying to find ways to deal with the trauma that they had that had not been processed or managed quite yet. Not surprisingly, there was a lot of mental health issues that we observed, post-traumatic stress disorder, and then what we see from chronic trauma, really in these personality disorders and conduct disorders, other impulse control disorders, where in order to deal with often underlying depression and anxiety, but certainly underlying trauma, were a lot of behaviors and challenges that the kids were presenting, as they were really just trying to do their best to deal with what they had been experiencing, and dealing with all of those things on top of just being a normal teenager, which we know is already a difficult time of our lives for anybody. The relational disruptions, not surprisingly, the youth had it took a minute for them to trust the folks in the program. It took a minute for them to trust each other, and then to trust us on the staff who were there to be there and support them. This was a surprise, and we heard it multiple times as the program went on, that we became the most stable relationships in their lives that they had experienced for a number of years, because as their placements changed and schools changed and family structures changed, that everything around them often was changing, and the program became a source of stability and consistency for them that they didn't experience in their lives outside of the program. And so this last note I have here about the positive impact of what I would call relatively small efforts, the way that our program was set up and the amount of time that we spent with them. And we really, in my mind, provided a relatively small intervention for them. And it was astounding what the positive impact of that was. The positive impact of continued contact, the positive impact of continuing to show up and doing what we said we were going to do, and being available when we said we were going to be available, and giving them second chances when they made a mistake, that really they kept showing up. They showed really profound loyalty to their friends in the program and to the program itself. Many of them stepped up and found ways to give back. We now have the second cohort of the group has begun, and several of the older youth are coming back to volunteer and to help with that. They've stayed engaged. We found that even when things got hard, they would try again and they would not give up. And that was really astounding, given everything that they were carrying, that the efforts that we were making were having such an impact on them. I wanted to tell you a bit about, after participating in the program, where did our young people end up? So you can see from this funny little diagram here that the full group that started in 2015, there was 32, and for various reasons, some of them didn't complete participation and stopped participating in the program after that first summer. Really, we had 25 youth who participated fully. 21 of them graduated from high school. When we're talking to funders, or we're talking to other folks in education and sharing out about the program, we find that what they really want to know is how many kids graduated and how many went to college. And while we have those numbers, and I think it's important to share them and talk about it, what I always want to make sure to do is to represent well the stories of and the experiences of the youth who maybe are on the margin here. This 4 of our kids who still have not graduated from high school, 2 years after when we would have expected them to. And the reason why I think it's important that I point them out is that they're still trying. These are young people who are working, who are taking a class at a time at an alternative high school, who've entered school and then had to leave over and back multiple times, but they keep trying. And I feel like that is even more a testament to their positive outcomes, and not necessarily as it relates to the program, but just for themselves as human beings. That to me says a whole lot about who they are and where they're going to land and where their lives are going to lead, even more so sometimes than what a typical high school graduation might say about someone. So that's a really important group that I make sure to point out. And even outside the program, we continue to support them and check in with them. You can see for the rest of the young people who did graduate from high school, most of them did go on to college right away, which we're very proud of. And that was one of the expected outcomes of the program. And so we're very pleased and proud that the 13 of the 21 did go on to do that. We have a number of kids who went into the military or who were working and preparing to go to the military, and then others who went straight into working. The thing that's important to point out about our military youth and those who went straight to work is that when I ask them about their intentions to go to college, they all still say that they plan to, and that they're working up to it, or that they'll do it as part of the military, or that they're going to start taking classes at a community college. So the intention and the reality of wanting a college education to still be a part of their lives is very much integrated for these young people, even if they were not able or didn't have the desire to enter college right away. So back to this diagram, it's the same as when you looked at it before. And our youth in care who are entering adulthood, even if they're not entering college, I wanted to point out that all of these realities are still the same, that the stress of being first generation person, if not in college and work, we have a lot of our youth who do not have a single example of an adult in their lives who got up and went to work every day. That was just not something that they ever saw. It wasn't something that they ever saw modeled for them. And so for them, they're almost a first generation worker. I don't know if that's a term, maybe we should coin it. But this is a new experience for them to think about being somebody with a stable job. Then the issues about being low income, continuing to carry their trauma and their mental health concerns. The homelessness I'm seeing so much of with our young people, even those who are in college, but definitely the kids who are not in college and trying to find stable housing. And then the continued family responsibilities. That all continues even for our young people who did not enter college. Some of the things that we've observed for our young people who went to college and or to work and or to the military, or who are still working to figure all of that out, they definitely have some things in common. One of them being is that they really feel quite on their own, that they are now responsible for supporting themselves. In Illinois, DCFS continues to provide financial assistance and some casework support for young people through the age 21 and 23 if they're in college. And even when that's the case, most of them have now transitioned, if they're not in college, or even if they are, they've transitioned out of foster homes and into these more independent living type programs where the support is quite different, but they certainly don't have anybody that feels like a parent in their world at this time. And so this feeling like they are suddenly an instant adult is quite pervasive for our youth who are still trying to figure out what time management means and how to deal with the constant financial stress of juggling jobs and other commitments, whether or not they're attending school. And there's just a lot that they still don't know. And of course they don't know yet about how to be an adult. And so I'm still trying to support those young people, even though they're not sort of officially in the program anymore. The other area that we see they have in common is trying to find ways of creating community. A lot of them have come to realize that some of their friendships or their peer groups or even some of their family relationships, unfortunately, that they had leaned on in the past are maybe examples of a type of lifestyle or decisions that they don't really want to be a part of anymore. And finding ways to create community with a new group of peers has been really challenging, whether or not the youth are in college. For those that are in college, it seems that it's a little bit easier because they're surrounded by the peers. Those who've gone into work or who are still sort of trying to work out what they're going to do next, it is really difficult to find support from young people who are their age. They're all experiencing some challenges regarding transportation, whether it's getting to and from campus or work. And the same issue about trusting folks stays with them, and trying to navigate what that looks like in new relationships is still hard. they all continue to be involved in DCFS to some degree, but what that involvement looks like is still challenging. They're on the one hand really ready to be out of the system, quote unquote, but still, you know, benefit from some of the financial support that that DCFS is providing for them. But their families are still involved in the system, many of them, and they worry about their parents, they worry about their siblings. They're sending money home, or they're trying to fill the gap for services that their parents maybe never got. And then there's this interesting experience that they're having of feeling homesick, but with no home to speak of. For young people who went away to college, in particular, they're talking about, you know, their peers who came from more typical families, talking about being homesick, and that they also feel this sort of longing and grief, but they don't have anything to attach it to, and they don't have a home to go back to during breaks or during summers, and that's really challenging. They also feel this big pressure to succeed. They want to be an example to their families, to their peers, prove their caseworkers maybe wrong if anybody ever doubted what they could accomplish. But they also really see success as sort of their only option. They don't have a safety net, and they feel this pressure on themselves that they have to figure this out. They have to succeed and make it work, because nobody else is going to do it for them. What amazes me, and why I love these people so much, is the strength and opportunities that they've found, the successes that they've achieved, in spite of all of these challenges that they're carrying. I imagine for any of you who work with youth in care, it really takes your breath away and is quite astounding to see the burdens and the struggles that they carry and how they keep going, and they adapt to new situations, and they don't give up, and they still somehow have hope for their future. They have so many experiences working and dealing with different people. They're far more mature than their peers, who are coming from less complicated backgrounds, and they really have some clear priorities about what they want to try and achieve. I continue to be amazed at how they're able to dream and able to think about their futures in a way with hope and excitement, and prioritizing what's important to them, and remaining loyal to their family and friends, and wanting to be a good example and make good on promises that they've made to people throughout their lives about who they're going to be. So with this group, some colleagues of mine asked a couple years ago if they could do a research study on the program, and what that amounted to was interviewing our young people, and trying to get to know what their experience of the program was like. So you can see some information here about the sample of our 24 youth who were there at the time. 17 participated in the interviews for this research study, in several interviews, and the analysis on the data that has transpired after is, for those who are interested in this, is an iterative interpretivist thematic analysis, starting with a coding system of all of the interview data. And where this data led the research team at first was to realize that even though the questions being asked of the youth about their experience of the program most broadly, what was it like and what parts worked for them and what did they hope would happen in the future, what the team found was that relationships was the most significant theme. When the youth talked about what impact the program had on them, relationships came up. What they would remember years in advance, the relationships is what they honed in on. So the team decided to take the relationship data and a subset of the data to do further analysis, that instead of stopping there and saying, so the program was meaningful because it had these relationships, the team really wanted to dive into that further and understand what exactly it was about the relationships that was impactful for the young people. What the youth said was that the relationships felt like family, and they used words associated with family all the time. And then this is just a collection of the themes as they started to coalesce into clusters, where the youth were talking about how people in the program were always there and providing support, that they would not give up on them, and that no matter what they did, that the program was going to be there for them, that they saw the relationships continuing into the future and enduring through lots of ups and downs. The youth were comfortable to be themselves in the context of these relationships, and they had someone to talk to. There was sort of a mutuality in the relationships that felt real, that the relationships were a real thing and not just people doing their jobs. And the youth felt that within the context of these relationships that they could grow, they could have fun, they felt understood, and they felt wanted. And these really were the most salient findings that began to coalesce as the analysis went on. And so where this led to was really an articulation from the youth's experience and the articulation of their experience of this new framework for understanding the value and impact of relationships that they experienced. And the team ended up naming it Steadfast Benevolence. And you can see here in this little diagram where that came from, where that language came from, that from the previous groupings of themes and codes from the data, you can see on the left, they started to coalesce into these thematic clusters of consistent and dependable, durable and persistent and long-term. And that those three started to come together and really sounded like stability and unconditional presence, which turned into steadfast. And then you can see at the bottom, the second clustering of open and accepting relationships, and that it was authentic and positive and encouraging. It was loving and giving was the summary of that, which led to the idea of benevolence. So this became the final finding of this set of really rich interview data, that the youth said that the program mattered to them and made an impact on them because they experienced steadfast benevolence in the relationships they had with the staff and with their peers throughout the time in the program. This is an important finding in my mind because it tells us that what the youth needed and the reason why the program seemed to fulfill their needs was around this need in their relational lives. So when I think about suggestions for where things can or possibilities for programs for young people in high school, like the First Star program, or certainly once youth get into college or into the community, there are some things that I think we have learned from our youth and directly from them, which I think is very important, that we asked them why this was important and why it worked for them. I think it's important that their voice gets to lead the charge in our understandings and the suggestions that we make. So I think that what they told us that they needed were relationships that were steadfast and benevolent, and I think that then we can take forward. So in support programs for high school or college age or just young adults in care, I think that focusing on relationships is something that we can and should continue to do. That's strengthening relationships with their foster caregivers, certainly, and biological parents, if that's still a possibility, but then creating opportunities to be in close relationship with other adult mentors and supporters, whether it's on campus or in the community. The relationships with their peers, with other young people who understand where they're coming from, who've had similar experiences, who can, who they don't have to explain what a foster parent is. That's a really important relationship for them to have as well. The other thing, an area of focus, I think, is to, we need to not lose sight of the need for trauma support and healing for these young people. We know that they've been through a lot, and the impact of those traumas and experiences that they've had maybe changes over time, but it certainly doesn't go away. And so they need continued, at each stage of life, they need continued focus on how to manage their emotional lives and improve their emotional regulation. They need access to therapeutic support, I would say, definitely with a focus on alternatives to talk therapy. For some of young people in general, that can be a challenge. But certainly we know that trauma-informed care points us to alternative therapies as well. Having connection to support services on a campus or in the community. This can be whether it's support groups or job training or life skills, these executive functioning skills, that there's still a continued need to heal, frankly, some parts of their brains that have been impacted by what they've been through. There's a group curriculum called Turning Impossible into Possible that a colleague here at Loyola created that is a way of moving through barriers and increasing hope. But I know that there's a lot of other opportunities for group curricula as well to help young people move through their trauma. The other thing that the youth need, and we see whether they're in college or not, is just instrumental aid. They do not have food security or housing security. Whether they're in college or not, we want them to have books, but certainly in college, being able to afford to pay for their books, being able to get a wardrobe that they feel good about to go to their on-campus job, or a uniform for the work that they're doing. So all of these instrumental items that they need, that, and this is obviously financial mostly, but those continue to be needs that our youth express as they are moving into their adulthood. And the last area I wanted to touch on was for those of you who may be in the world of conducting and generating research and knowledge in this area, but even those who are not, I think that anyone with practice experience, we really want to lean on you, our colleagues in that area, to point to us what research questions we should be asking to improve the supports that we can offer foster youth and improve their lives in general. These are just some of the ones that I'm thinking about and working on. But we talk in child welfare about providing safety and permanence and well-being for our youth, and we need to do some work in the well-being area. I think that's what our program ultimately was focused on, was improving the well-being of our young people in the program. But it would be interesting to learn how their outcomes differ if they go to college immediately or if they do some other work or military experience. We might want to know about these relationships that are so important to them, and are they able to endure the transition out of care and into adulthood, whether that's with their foster caregivers or biological caregivers or program staff, like the program that we were running, and do those relationships continue, and how do they continue, or why do they continue? I think we want to learn a little bit more about what outcomes are most important for a successful launch into adulthood. What do they need? What are the things that really are going to help them the most to make this launch into adulthood? And as an aside, well, what do we mean by successful? What does that even look like? And do the young people get to decide what is success for themselves? This is sort of the area that I'm working on currently, and trying to understand from the youth themselves how they understand and experience well-being while they're in care. I wanted to have youth involved. This is a participatory action research project, having them involved in setting the research agenda, but then also moving the project forward so that it really could be a youth-driven answer to this question. What is well-being to them? What does it look like? And hopefully that can lead us in the future to finding ways that we can not only measure well-being better, but also work to improve it as young people move through the system. So that is what I have to share with you today. I am open to questions that either you send through to Amy on the chat, or however you work this, Amy.
Okay, great. Thank you. So thanks, Bridget, for your presentation. If you could go ahead and type in the questions that you have for Bridget, I'll give people a minute to do that. And then I can read those out as those come in. So one question is, can you say a bit more about what the TIP group curriculum does?
Absolutely. So this was a program model that our colleague, Dr. Philip Hong, has created, and he created it in a different context. It was with folks who've struggled in return to work type programs or who've had chronic unemployment. And the way that the program is set up for that group is over 16 weeks. It's not just a job training program. It really is more aimed at doing some of what we see as the internal mindset and clinical healing type of work that is required for someone to be able to sort of avail themselves to work and find healing and skills that prevent their maybe some of their difficulties from getting in the way of their own success. So what that looks like is there's a little bit of anger management, there's a little bit of forgiveness work and learning empathy for ourselves and for other people. There's some work around self-esteem and understanding sort of understanding and letting go of previous failures that sometimes plague people as they try and move forward. So the overall idea is trying to move people from a place where their obstacles define their life and their decisions to where their hope defines their life and their decisions. And there's an idea called psychological self-sufficiency, which is sort of the linchpin between the barriers to hope evolution that people go through in this program. So at the moment, we're working to translate and revise that program to be applicable to youth in care, because we know that the burdens and obstacles, barriers that they encounter sometimes can make it seem difficult to have hope for their future. And we really need them to be able to do some of the healing so that they can move over those barriers and move into a hopeful future. So so that's what it looks like. There is a pretty detailed curriculum for those things, but we're working on one that will apply to youth in care.
Okay, great, thank you. So the next question is, how do the multiple First Star Academy locations communicate with each other? Do you all check in and or learn from each other?
Yeah, that's a great question. We definitely do. There are monthly webinars that are hosted for folks that run the academies across the country and internationally. We get together once a year for an annual conference, either in Washington, D.C. or at another location. We did some advocacy work actually at Capitol Hill when we were there last year all together. And there's a lot of sharing that happens. There's a national office, the First Star National Office does a great job of keeping people connected and helping to share resources and share best practices. But as the relationships between the academies grows and continues, people lean on each other directly without going through the national office sometimes as well.
Okay. And then another question we have is, has First Star Academy done any larger evaluations of their program across sites? If so, what were their findings? And if not, do you know if they plan on trying to become an evidence-based practice?
So the answer to the first is no. That's sort of getting worked up to. So we were the 4th site, I think, to get started, and we started in 2015. And then it's been growing since then. So the establishment of sort of a national data collection model hasn't come together yet. We're talking about it though, because as whomever is offering this question, finding ways that we can coordinate best practices and create some evidence-based work that's happening at each place while at the same time being reflective of and responsive to the individual local contexts. That's the intended outcome. So we're working on that.
Okay, thank you. So the next question is, can you talk a bit more about how you ensure youth are able to attend programming even when their placements change? Do you provide transportation assistance?
So for our program, we're in Chicago, and we found that young people were being referred to and applying for the program from all over Cook County, which is the large area. And some of our sister programs around the country are serving more rural areas, and youth are really far away. So transportation, we found became a really critical component, and ended up, being something that we spent far more money on than we anticipated, but decided that having them present was the most important starting place, and therefore it was worthwhile. So yes, transportation is a challenge. We, I think, had sort of hoped or idealized at one time that the individual caregivers would be able to bring youth to the program. And that was just really hard for a lot of reasons, for distance or for unstable transportation for the adults themselves, or they have other youth that they're taking care of, or children they're taking care of. So the barriers to that were great enough that then we found that we were finding, oh, so-and-so can't come this month because of all of these things. So we decided that transportation needed to be part of what we offered, and we pay a lot for it, and it's just something that we decided we have to do.
Okay, thank you. So I haven't had any other questions come in, so I think we'll stop there. Bridget, I want to thank you again for doing the webinar today. I appreciate it. And thank you everyone for attending. We will be posting the recording of this webinar as well as the PowerPoints on our NRC FAHE website. So be sure to check that and share with anyone you think might be interested. And I hope that you all will join us for our April webinar. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.